Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I want to send my love to all my listeners all over the world, especially in North America, Canada, Kenya, and anywhere where you may be listening. You are so welcome. And I especially want to welcome all my subscribers who I just absolutely adore. And I'm not just saying that, I mean, you really are an exceptional bunch of people. And I just think it's just so wonderful to have this passion in common for the hairy man and to have our minds so open to the possibility of this creature really roaming our forests in North America. And I think if you have a closed mind to these things, you truly miss out on so much. Anyway, you're going to enjoy tonight's story because tonight's story comes from a lovely lady called Catherine from Rochester in the United Kingdom. And she came to stay with her friend in America. And there are so many types of Sasquatches out there. You get the gentle, kind ones, and you can get the aggressive ones. And she had an encounter with two very gentle Sasquatch females who tried to protect her against a nasty male Sasquatch. So I think you're going to really get into this story. Let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Catherine and I'm from the United Kingdom, where I live in a small place called Rochester, which is a beautiful historic town that overlooks the Medway River. My Bigfoot encounter happened in North America, in the Northern Peninsula, where I went to stay with my best friend Helena. Helena and I had been inseparable at school, and I decided I liked her when she saw me struggling in a sewing class with a blue and white gingham apron. And she took it from me and finished sewing it. I was so useless at sewing, and the teacher was stunned by my extraordinary progress. Imagine what she thought, from barely being able to stitch anything at all, to suddenly making these most perfect stitches and finishing and completing the apron. From that moment on, Helena was my hero. I remember she was the most extraordinary swimmer, and she actually ended up getting a bursary in America to a prestigious university there, which is where I believe she actually eventually met her husband. Growing up, Helena lived on a dairy farm, and we would both go riding our horses over the lush green idyllic valleys together, and sometimes I would watch her father tending to their cows. I remember that dairy as if it was yesterday. I would be watching in fascination as machines pumped the milk from those cows' udders. That milk was the most delicious milk I have ever tasted in my entire life. It was so creamy. Enough of that nostalgia, and back to my story. Many long years passed without ever being in contact with my best friend Helena. I wanted to get in touch with her, but I was so afraid that she had moved on with her life and made new friends and long since forgotten me. I always wondered about her and missed her terribly. And one day through Facebook, I reached out to her, and the rest is history. Helena was so thrilled to hear from me after all those long years, and she begged me to come and stay with her at her home in America for a few weeks, and so that's what I did. This was in the July of 2007. It was wonderful seeing her again, and I was surprised to see how little she had changed, and it felt as if we had never ever been apart. Helena had become a hard-working mother. She was devoted to her one son and her two daughters that were both very busy in school and hectically involved in sports. Like their mother, her children were very outdoorsy and enjoyed everything from whitewater rafting, canoeing, mountain climbing, hiking and swimming. Their beautiful Cape Cod-style house was situated on 55 acres of land. The property was full of rolling green valleys dotted with different varieties of trees, and then on the left-hand side of the valley, there was a high mountainous ridge. This mountainous outcrop led down to another even lower valley, which had a large stream running through it and a grassy embankment, which opened up into a large area of natural woodland. The property was stunningly beautiful and was teeming with abundant wildlife, but my big favourite were the American white-tailed deer. They struck me as being the most gentle, docile creatures. While Helena was dealing with all the demands of her children, those were the times I would either go shopping in a nearby town or exploring her lovely property on my own. I enjoy my own company, so being on my own has never been an issue for me. It was weird that she lived on this land, but never really got to enjoy it because she was such a busy mother running after her family. Chloe had ballet, Russell had karate, and Jonathan had swimming. There were so many extracurricular activities for the kids to do that by the time they came home, it was dinner, TV, and bed. I was so glad to be the one to get to enjoy her beautiful home that in many ways was relatively unexplored by her busy family, who had moved to the property 2 years prior, and even Helena admitted that she had not even explored her own land due to her hectic work schedule. One day I decided to go for a walk in the lower valley so that I could enjoy the lovely stream and explore the forests. Coming from England, I was in awe of this extraordinary amount of space in the American wilderness. It is something we Brits find so extraordinary about your wonderful land. Please don't ever take it for granted. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. I was sitting by the stream that was dotted around with the large, smooth natural boulders that you could sit on like natural sun lounges. It was a glorious sunny day, and the shafts of sunlight warmed my whole body. I could see some white-tailed deer watching me through the line of trees that formed the outer perimeter of the woods. I listened to the sounds of birds tweeting, and I watched dragonflies darting over the clear water, and there were hundreds of monarch butterflies everywhere. It was just breathtaking, and I was transfixed by the beauty. Suddenly I could see a large figure coming down the ridge, which was so sheer I was surprised that anyone could walk down it as effortlessly as this person was. Even though he was a fair distance away, he looked like he worked out a lot because his upper torso looked huge. But the thing that made me take another look at this man was he appeared to have very long arms. I did think that was peculiar at the time, and I could sense that he was looking at me from the ridge. I had no clue who he was or what on earth he was doing on the ridge. However, he was shaking his fists at me as though he was angry. I knew that I was invited here by Helena, so whoever this was, they had no right to disrespect me like that. Soon my attention was diverted from that horrid man on the ridge, and I chose to ignore him, to the most beautiful butterfly I had ever seen in my entire life. It had purple, blue, yellow, and white wings, and it landed on my hand and sat there for a while, and I was delighted. After a while I decided to go exploring the woods, and as I entered, some of the white tails scattered away from me. The woods were beautiful and shaded, and the large top-heavy branches provided a wonderful canopy, keeping the forest cool, which was a refreshing change from the heat of the day. I was surprised to see so many branches had been snapped, because there were branches from healthy trees that looked as if they had been manually broken off by someone who must have been exceedingly strong. There were also parts of the tree where the branch had been removed up to about 8 feet off the ground. That was strange too, I thought. Suddenly everything in the forest became very, very still and eerily quiet. So much so, in fact, that I actually felt very uncomfortable. This quietness was not natural, I thought. Suddenly I could hear this chattering sound, almost as if two people were carrying on a conversation. I was relieved to hear some kind of noise, and I found myself gravitating towards it, but I was not prepared by what I was to see. I saw the backs of two very large bears having a conversation together in gibberish. Bear in mind that we do not have bears here in England, but I knew enough about the creatures to know that they do not talk to each other in this way. I really got the impression that this chattering sound was like a language, because it was like two people talking together very fast, and these creatures were clearly enjoying their conversations, just like two humans would together. These bears were covered in sandy-coloured, thick, short hair, and they were about 7 feet tall and 600 pounds. It suddenly occurred to me that a bear would not be standing on 2 feet all this time like these creatures did. Not once do they get down on their fours like a bear would. I then noticed the long arms, and I caught a glimpse of the human-like hands. In that moment I realised that these were not bears at all, but I didn't know what they were. I did not have the foggiest idea what these creatures were, and I got a full view of their faces, I was even more confused by them. These creatures, whatever they were, reminded me of humans. They reminded me of a human that was naked but just covered in hair. They were both females because they had hairy breasts. Their heads were cone-shaped, but the details of the face were a little far away to get a close look. Suddenly I found myself getting pins and needles on one of my feet, and so I shook it silently to increase the circulation. And as I did this, I accidentally snapped a tree branch. And when I did this, the sound was very loud. The two creatures stopped talking almost at once, and both their heads turned in my direction. It was like they knew exactly where the noise had come from, and they literally sprinted over to where I was hiding, and I saw these two primate-like faces staring down at me because they were tall, remember. I could see these creatures were surprised and even shocked to see me. I think the last thing they expected to see was a human hiding behind the tree. They both looked at each other and started chattering. I think they were talking about me, and their faces looked very concerned and worried. Suddenly the intensity of their chatter increased, and I got the impression that they were arguing about something, and that something that they were arguing about was me. Then one of the female Bigfoot looked at me with a look of intensity, and she chattered and tried to mime what she was telling me. She brought over a clean wrap from a deer carcass that had been eaten and cleaned up, and she pointed at this carcass. I thought she was actually asking me if I was hungry, so I shook my head. The creature then looked exasperated as she tried to communicate to me. She pointed at the rack again, and then at me, and then towards the outer edge of the forest. Finally, she raised her arms to above her head, and then to her sides, as if emphasizing the size of something. Then she started to do a funny kind of act of dragging one of her legs. I got the impression she was miming someone, but who and what I didn't know. She then pointed to me and began acting as if she was chewing something. What on earth was she trying to tell me, I thought. I was equally exasperated by what she was trying to mime. Suddenly both these female Sasquatches seemed to grow alarmed as they sensed something or someone was coming, and they seemed eager to hide me and started pushing me to the undergrowth, and then both females peed around the area where I was hiding. They rarely looked frantic, as I had a good view of them and got the instinct impression that they both wanted to protect me from something or someone, so I guess I decided to trust them, because they seemed very concerned about me in a genuine way, and there was nothing hostile in their manner. Then I heard it. It was the most thunderous roar that I have ever heard in my entire life, and it was exceedingly high-pitched, and it was painful to listen to. I physically felt sick to my stomach from the sound, and I could see the female creatures looking nervously towards the side of the forest that faced the creek and the high ridge where I had seen that large human walking. Now I was beginning to realize that that human with the long arms was probably not human at all, but one of these creatures. I remember it had seen me and appeared to be shaking its fist at me as though it was angry. Maybe the creatures were coming into the forest now, and this was the creature they were protecting me from. By the sound of that roar, he was not a creature to be trifled with. I heard a few guttural grunts reminiscent of someone who was having a hissy fit. I also could hear the sound of his feet as they pressed against the leaves on the forest floor. And the creature also sounded as if he was dragging one of his feet behind him, as if it was injured. Suddenly I heard a huge noise, like something big was walking through the forest, and whatever it was, even those female creatures were afraid of it. I peered through the thicket to see what this thing was, and it was the male creature, and he was twice the size of the females. All I can say was that he was bipedal, scary-looking, and giant-like, with a humped back and rippled with muscles of gargantuan proportion that almost exploded through his upper torso, and shoulders with an exaggerated bubbly definition. He was not sandy-coloured like the other females, but the darkest black that I have ever seen, that made him almost appear demonic. I watched him growling viciously at the two female creatures and pounding his chest. Once again he made that huge guttural growl, and it was too terrible for words. I never hear that sound again, it will be too soon. One of the females handed the big fella a dead squirrel, and I saw him squat down on his 2 legs. I noticed one of his feet was very swollen and almost malformed. He proceeded to eat the squirrel like it was a hot dog, and he made these ghastly sounds as he gobbled down the flesh. Then after he ate it, he curled down in a dark corner that was covered in mosses, grasses and twigs, and it was not long before he started to snore very loudly. I have never heard anything snore like that, and I've never seen anything get to sleep that fast either. Imagine a large human snore for a moment, and increase the volume 10 times over, and you might just get a sense of how this giant creature sounded when he snored. The 2 females rushed over to my side, and one of them threw me over their shoulders as if I weighed only half an ounce. She darted with me through the forest at such lightning speed and with such stealth. What was even more amazing was that she ran up to Helena's home and dropped me 10 yards from her front door and then scurried back to the woods. I watched her literally glide over the green grass of Helena's pristine lawn towards the forest. I stood there in silence, hardly daring to believe what had happened. I realized that those creatures had been trying to tell me in their miming language that the big guy would have killed me and eaten me. They knew I was in danger, and they were fearful of what the big guy would do to me. I think he definitely called all the shots and ruled the roost in their family. I got the impression he must have been a real bully. He certainly looked like one. After everything that happened, it took me days to digest, weeks to assimilate, and months to find out what these creatures were. I was to learn that the creatures I saw were cryptids known as Sasquatch. Being from England, Bigfoot is not a subject that is vocalized much, and if you ask the average person what a Sasquatch really is, I doubt they would know. Even though I love Helena with all my heart, and she is still my very best friend in the whole wide world, I never told her my story. Not because she would doubt me, but because of my discomfort in telling it. I am English, reserved, and always a cynic by nature. So what happened to me in America is so out of the ordinary and so seemingly implausible. I just do not believe I will ever speak of my experience to anyone ever again, or anyone. However, your anonymous forum is a different matter altogether, because I can unleash my story, knowing that I can be as elusive as the hairy man himself. Well, thank you so much for the story, and indeed, you can remain completely anonymous. That's the whole idea of my forum. I want people to be able to come forward and to tell me their unusual stories, and people are not ever going to do that if they feel there's any possibility of being found out who they are, where the exact location is that this happened. They don't want people to know those details. And I totally relate to that. And I'll tell you why I relate to that. My family, I would never in a million years tell them about my belief in Bigfoot, because I want to tell you, they would roar with laughter and think I was completely bonkers. And I don't think there are many people that I know personally that I would say, hi, how are you? I believe in Bigfoot. So I totally identify with you. And I know my listeners will, because they are so open-minded, and I know they believed your story, as I do. Until next time, goodbye and good night.